Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this wonderful conference and to inviting me to give a talk. My talk is quite different from most of the talks I've heard, so I hope it makes sense. My background is I'm both a legal scholar and a philosopher, so here I stand from a legal philosophical point of view, but also I've also a background in philosophy of science, and that's part of this. I have only very fundamental knowledge of base and non-how whatsoever of statistics. My background is in scenario thinking, which is quite popular in the Netherlands, and we see that courts try to use it. And the thing I want to talk about today is about novel facts, and I'll start with a case to explain. So the case is that the scenario of the prosecution is that the defendant killed his wife. He stabbed her with a knife 70 times, whatever. But there's not much evidence. There's more evidence, but I keep it to this. There is evidence because there is a bloodstain of the wife on his clothes. Defendant uses his right to remain silent, but then when it gets nasty for him, after 1.5 years, he comes up with an alternative scenario, and he says probably it's done by two men, unknown men, who had visited them earlier. So he says, two men came in, I didn't know them, we had a fight, they pushed my wife and she fell on the ground and I helped her to stand up, and at some point she defended herself and she scratched one of the men. And he also explained why he didn't tell this before, because these men were from the criminal scene and he did some electricity stuff in this branch, so that was the reason they came up. They wanted him to do something for them too, and he said, I don't do that. Well, he went away, and when he came home his wife was dead. Now the interesting thing is that the evidence, the main evidence, is better explained by the alternative scenario than by the prosecution, because it was only a tiny bloodstain, and the expert said it's probable, or it's even at least possible, that when he helped his wife stand up, she had a little wound on her head. That was the point, that he got the blood, and not by stabbing her, because then you would expect more than this bloodstain. Moreover, when they tried to look at his alternative scenario, they found the DNA of an unknown man under her fingernail, and she was working, her daily business was working in a shop for women, selling women's clothes, so the chance that in this interaction she would have had DNA of a male was not so likely.
But did he tell a story and he already knew they found the DNA?
No, let's make it up now, because this is a real case, but I constructed a bit to make it simpler. So let's assume this comes up. So one might say that's the novel fact, so to speak. No other evidence of the visit. Okay. First, a small digression to Lakato's research programs. In the 70s, this was a very popular way of analyzing. It was an improvement of Popper's theory of falsification. Lakatos said, look here, you have research programs, and within the program you create theories. It's theoretically progressive. If the first program explains all or most of the facts that the other program explains, so it's a matter of comparing of alternative scenarios. If the research program predicts novel facts that the other cannot predict, and then the research program is empirically progressive if some of the predicted facts are confirmed. Okay, so when we look at scenarios in criminal law, we have the theory of Peter van Koppen is very popular with us, and what he says roughly is that scenario is better than the alternative if it explains all the facts that the alternative can explain, and the scenario explains some facts that the other cannot explain, at least not as good as the scenario. So these would be his discriminating facts. The question, of course, is, should we take Lakato's theory and say the scenario is specifically better if it predicts novel facts that the alternative does not or cannot predict, and some of the predicted facts are confirmed. Then you would have novel facts. And the novel facts, no, I'll state that later on. So what is a novel fact? There are two views within philosophy of science. One is that the fact was unknown at the time of creating your theory. The other one is that it was not used in the construction of a scenario. So these are different views of novel facts. So the one might say it's a time or knowledge novelty, and the other is a use or heuristic novelty. Now in science we are inclined to say to use the use novelty, but we've just heard a story that perhaps we must doubt that because we trust scientists to be honest, whereas in criminal law that might not be such a good thing to do. Okay, now what is our just simple plain lay intuition about explanation and prediction? That the prediction of novel facts has more epistemic value than the explanation of known facts or of facts used in a construction of a hypothesis. However, what is the theoretical underpinning? And this is fascinating. It turns out to be quite difficult, or at least there's controversy. There's not only theoretical disagreement in philosophy of science, but also among Bayesian, as I understood. I've read a paper saying, some say Bayes allows for the distinction and that's good. Some say Bayes allows for the distinction, that's bad. Some say Bayes does not allow for the distinction, which is a good thing, and some say Bayes does not allow for the distinction and it's a bad thing. So help me, please. So this is one of my questions. So we have the option that prediction does not have more value, or it has more value, but then most people would say it's instrumental because it's a sign of one or more underlying values. Okay, so where might we see the value? We might see the value in the context of discovery, but we also might see the value in the context of justification. I think it's easier to show that it has value in the context of discovery. First, intermediate. Let me make this distinction. The creation, I talk about creation if you create a scenario on the basis of known facts to explain them. I call it prediction if you allow to predict, which of course also is to explain novel facts. And I talk about accommodation if you have to adapt your hypothesis into a slightly different one to explain those facts. You can, but you have to adapt. So prediction would be, among others, an imperfect epistemic insurance against overfitting of your scenario to the evidence. And thus, if you have a created or especially an accommodated scenario, you still have to prove yourselves, and you could do that through prediction. And if the prediction comes out, you're on even with the other scenario. Okay, so where might it be useful in the context of logic or the logic of discovery? I think it's clear. It has methodological value because it's a tool to find new facts and new relations between evidence and theory. It's quite practical reason to invest time in a scenario to do further investigations. And it also is a tool to assess the competence of people, but also the veracity of people. So, talking about scientists, we would like just to talk about competence and not need to talk about veracity, but perhaps sometimes also. But anyway, veracity of defendant and witnesses, of course, is an important thing we want to assess. But what might the use be in the the context of justification? Is there also epistemic value there? Is it a reason to accept the statement of persons as more reliable, as more competent, or more veracious? Is it a reason to accept the scenario as more likely to be true, even if the novel facts in the end do not discriminate, because even though it didn't predict it, it can easily explain it, or it can be accommodated to explain the fact? So let me turn to the criminal context of a judge. So we don't have a jury system, we have a professional judge system. So here we have the professional judge. And he has to wonder whether the prediction does add epistemic weight to the piece of evidence itself. If so, when and why? And if it's predicted by the defendant or a witness, does it add only or also weight to the competence or the veracity of a statement? And if it does it add weight to the specific statement this person made, or also to other statements? And does it only add to related statements or also to unrelated statements? These are all questions. Okay, if it would, of course, add weight, then if we turn to the legal perspective, we might worry about the right to remain silent, because if prediction does indeed add epistemic weight to the evidence or the statement, then we have the normative question: is that compatible with the right to remain silent? Because it means, especially in criminal cases, that if you don't start to talk quite early, it might be impossible to predict new facts, it might be possible to predict them, but it might be very hard to confirm them or falsify them. It will remain in the open. And we see that factually courts take it into account, so it's negative when the weight adds up, and so we are approaching beyond reasonable doubt, and people start to talk. It's in several ways it might be too late. But is this fair? That's the question from a legal perspective. Even if we would agree that from an epistemic perspective this is the proper way to do, then still we have the problem: is it correct to do so from a legal perspective? So we have talked a lot about the prior and the presumption of innocence, and I think here we have, if my analysis is correct, and perhaps it's not, but if it makes sense, then we have another principle, namely the right to remain silent, which might be, we have to find a balance between our epistemic and our normative views. Okay, so my questions are, and as I explained, probably I will make some mistakes because I'm not really into more than the basics. So Bayesian do not seem to agree about the relevance of this distinction between explanation, accommodation and prediction, even though you, for instance, say, and that's interesting, that we should prefer Bayes above an argumentative approach, because the Bayesian system allows us to predict new things. So in a sense you make use of the idea, the difference between representing something and predicting something. So I really want to know your views of whether predictions are epistemically relevant, and how you would visualize or analyze this in a Bayesian system. And not, I'm convinced it's relevant in the context of discovery, but here of course I'm interested in the context of justification, where the judge has to make a decision. So if it's relevant, why? If not, why not? And if so, how to be taken into account? How can you visualize it in a Bayesian network? Now, I've never made a Bayesian network, so I tried something, so please apologize if I make mistakes. So here we have, I'm going not to the sort of high-level guilt hypothesis, but only to the hypothesis that he said, look, these men came around and we had this fight, and my wife fell, she scratched the person and she had a wound on her head. So we have three pieces of evidence. We have the tiny bloodstain, we have the DNA, and we have the defendant who is the witness. Okay, so with respect to the first, of course you talk about accuracy, but I was thinking perhaps so you could add as making a difference for the weight, whether he made an explanation, a prediction, or an accommodation. And the interesting thing is, because he never said anything, it's not an accommodation. If he had said in the beginning, look here, I don't know anything, I wasn't there, I haven't been, then he would have had to accommodate this evidence, and so that would be, in his scenario, much more problematic. It's an explanation, but it's a bit of a false explanation, one might say. Now, the DNA is interesting. Again, you have to test for the, you have to put weight for the accuracy. But again, here one might say this is interesting because to some extent this is a prediction, and a prediction that came true. Now with the eyewitness it's different, because then we look at accuracy, and I would say, so you have the competence and the veracity. I never understand what you mean by objectivity, so I skipped that part. And again, you could say it has importance both for the competence and for the veracity, and in the case of a defendant, especially the veracity, competence would be much more like witness we in principle trust, to be honest, but perhaps not that competent. So roughly this was my idea, and I must say I saw we didn't have discussion time, so I thought I gave a lecture of 20 minutes, and yes, I did it, to really have time now to hear, is this something I should think about further, and do you have suggestions, or is this all nonsensical and just forget about it and go home and do something else? Thank you very much.
Well, that was really interesting. My one question about the scenario structure, you have basically just positive evidence, blurred.
Yeah, but that's to make it simple, of course.
Sure.
Yeah.
What about missing things?
Sorry?
Things that you would expect but actually didn't show up.
Yeah, well, for instance,
It's a lot harder to bring in, just in general, and also for us as human beings to think about.
Yeah. Well, one thing that they looked at, and that's interesting because, of course, they tried to find out whether somebody had seen these men or a car parked they didn't know at both times. So at the time he said they came by, and at the time, estimated time of the murder. And no evidence was found, but it was in the evening, it was quiet, so it's not impossible that nobody has seen anything. So there were more things they have looked at. Yeah.
And these would all be plugged in the same.
Yeah, sure. I just made
the same way.
Yeah. And then we have, of course, the problem: how much weight should you put on the fact that they didn't find any evidence, other eyewitnesses or whatever, of a car or etc.
Very, very hard.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure if this addresses your main point, but it strikes me that your story and your diagram don't quite tally, because what's very important in your story is the fact that he first of all exercised his right to remain silent.
Yeah.
And 18 months later, he gave this additional information.
Yeah.
So you really need another node for which is his testimony.
Yeah.
Which not just the content, but the timing.
Yeah.
And why.
And how would you put that? I agree. And moreover, what then should be put in is also the reason why. Not just the timing, but also the reason, namely that he would incriminate himself by explaining this. So he had some sort of reason to remain silent, apart from the fact that in the Netherlands nowadays they say keep silent, their lawyers. So it's also a technical matter whether you can blame the defendant for being silent, because perhaps it was his lawyer, but you're right.
There are alternative causes. You could include those as alternative causes of why he.
Yeah, sure. And so I agree the timing, but more specifically the reason why he kept silent. You should put a weight on that too. I agree. Yeah.
Alternative causes.
I'm moving from front to back, right?
Yeah. You asked about the rewarding in a Bayesian setting of making right predictions in a scenario.
Yeah.
Well, this rewarding is automatically included because making predictions about a new finding which supports a hypothesis automatically increases the strength of that hypothesis. So within the Bayesian framework, it's automatic, this rewarding.
I don't see, because I only see explanation, of course, when the fact comes true, whether or not it was claimed or predicted. That adds weight to it, but I don't see how the predictive part, So I'm also looking at the sort of the three Bayesians I know from the last conference.
The point is,
I would have thought the standard Bayesian position, maybe you could do a more sophisticated argument, is to be not particularly impressed with novel facts, because the benefit of novel facts is particularly impressing a third party. It's some kind of guarantee against cheating, but the usual Bayesian perspective imagines a kind of disinterested pursuit of the truth of an individual and doesn't care about that verification.
Yeah, but it's not only. I would say it's not only a matter of cheating. It's also because sometimes the level up to which your belief that the scenario is the correct one is perhaps not really strong, and so you have really tested your hypothesis by making predictions coming true.
You're really trying to code what we think, what people think, what normal people think.
Yeah, but also whether they are correct to do so, whether a Bayesian would say so, and whether philosophers
I would say
of
just
science would say
disinterested
so.
pursuit of the truth. You wouldn't care if the fact is novel or not novel. It's just
No,
That's
but what I explained is prediction in itself is not relevant, but it's a proxy for truth, because it gives you some certainty. Okay, I haven't cheated, I haven't made it up, I haven't overfitted my theory to what I know, thus I am allowed. So going back to yesterday to Ronald Meester, who puts emphasis on belief, that's why I'm interested in his view, because this might connect more to his theory than to Bayes. But
I really want to get these questions from the back that have been asking for a long time. Christian?
I think the last thing you said is really important, because I mean, the question is, well, does it matter if a certain piece of evidence surfaces before or after a hypothesis was formulated? And you had a slide there where with some idea about some kind of general idea that it would be stronger evidence afterwards. But it seems to me that it's not that it's not correct that it's generally so, because it's only the case that when the evidence turns on whether someone is lying or telling the truth. I mean, if you would have a situation where you would have a forensic scientist who would be at a crime site and dig up evidence one after the other, you wouldn't say that it matters whether a certain hypothesis was formulated between when we found evidence 2 or 3, or between 3 or 4, right? That wouldn't matter. But it matters here exactly because if someone is lying, then that, as you said, that person, it matters what that person knows about what you know.
Yeah.
So that person will fit his story to what you know. And if then later it turns out that you know more,
so that's why I made a distinction.
so it's only in that specific situation that the timeline matters.
So it's not timeline. As I explained, novel facts can be time novel and it can be use novel.
Right.
But even for the scientist, it's important, because if you construct your scenario on the basis of some evidence, that's fine, but you still have to test it. So that's the general view also in philosophy of science. How do I test not the veracity of a scientist whom we trust, but really whether his hypothesis was not a matter of overfitting the facts to, or the scenario to the facts. So it's also an instrument. It's not sort of essential, but it's the best proxy we have to make sure we were not overfitting the scenario to the facts.
Yeah.
So
The central thing is what the liar knows about what you know.
Right.
That's what it's all about.
No.
But what people know
Yeah.
is more important than when.
Sorry?
What they know is more important than when they know it.
Yes, but even if they know, I mean, this shows from philosophy of science, even if they know, but they didn't realize the moment they created the theory, they created it on the basis of 3 facts. And they said, look here, now I found this is, etc. And then later on they realize, and they honestly realize, I also know this, and now I understand it. I mean, so you don't know whether they knew it subconsciously,
And we're getting
etc.,
into
etc. But
psychology.
No, that's not also
Can I-
true.
Can I ask Marion?
Thank you for giving us this wonderful problem to think about.
thank you. I'm looking forward to your answer.
I'd like to encourage you to go on with it.
Okay.
My perspective on this is that I think you need to model the decision.
Sorry?
There is a decision process going on with
Yeah,
this
yeah.
defendant. So
Yeah.
you should model the decision
Yeah.
of giving this this testimony of the
Yeah.
alternative hypothesis.
Yeah.
Because there's a certain risk
Yeah.
that the prediction would not come true.
Yeah.
And you need to incorporate that, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
It's all Bayesian analysis.
Yeah.
You have utility. You take a certain decision,
Yeah.
and it can have a certain yield.
No, I understand, because I would have to make this. How do I do this? Yeah. So I would have to make the P more complicated in the sense that I would have to add to it how risky it was.
Yes, there
Roughly.
should be what we call the decision note.
Yeah.
You can have several decisions.
Yeah.
I can now say this, or I can say something else,
Yeah.
or I can say nothing at all.
Yeah.
And there should be some reward to it. So
Yeah. And the reward is bigger if my predict. I mean, if I now predict that
Cost
tomorrow at
reward.
8 o'clock it will be light, that's not really a prediction.
And so all of
Yeah.
that should go in there, and then you
Yeah.
have the full Bayesian perspective, I think. But this is just,
And so where, I mean, is this something you build in this or on top of this, or?
it goes in the network, so there's
Yeah.
another node or.
Okay. Well, we can talk
the
about that.
Bayesian networks can also handle decisions and optimal decisions.
Okay. Okay. Well, please explain me later on. Thank you very much.
Now, I could just, there is coffee, but those who want, we could save it. And those who would, want to move.
Can we hear from Martin? He hasn't spoken. I want to hear
Exactly.
you.
Well, there's lots more questions. Okay.
I gave this talk especially for the three of you.
Let's just get Martin's question now.
Okay. As one of the supposed Bayesians in the audience, this is great. Yeah, this
Thank you very much.
is an approach which I think we would have great sympathy with.
Okay.
And coincidentally, it's one that we've been working on over the last few months. Although there may be a slightly different tack or perspective that we've taken. But what we've done is that we've looked at the philosophy of science, and in the criterion sense, we would agree that those theories that make the best predictions are the ones that over time you should trust more thoroughly, or give greater weight to, regardless of the explanatory mechanism that they might deploy. And what we've done is we've looked at the legal process and asked, at what stage do we have a step in the legal process that's the best approximation to this test of validity, this empirical test of validity? And it seems to us that the one that's the best approximation from our naive view is cross-examination. So witnesses appear in court and are cross-examined. And it's at that point that the court has the opportunity to generate novelty, surprises, questions that are answered in ways which we don't expect.
But would you
Falsehoods
also
are generated.
cross-examine? Would you also cross-examine the police to
Oh
find
yeah,
out?
every
Because it
credibility
holds
of every
also to that.
source is open to test.
Okay. Yeah.
And that process is one which we can cast in a Bayesian framework.
Okay.
Maybe not in the Bayesian frameworks that we've investigated thus far, but it seems to us at least that formally there's a way of dealing with this. Philosophically, I think we've developed something in parallel that might in some ways match some of the requirements that you pose to us. But it's wonderful that you've come to a point that's...
It's well, I hope I can read some of your stuff and
It's going to be presented at the next workshop, so...
It's
going to be discussed in the preview.
in the next one.
You're going to be part of that prior workshop. You're there.
Yeah, in the pre-workshop, in the case analysis, but not in the.
No, it'll be discussed there as well.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you
Okay,
very much.
I'm going to put a stop to it. but
Can I ask, just not that you have to answer, but any lawyer, I mean, I posed this question about the right to remain silent, so I would like to hear, but that need not be in full audience. How do you feel about this? Because this is really something that worries me, perhaps even more than the presumption of innocence.
It's a delicate thing.
Okay, so but
But
that's my
if
question.
you have questions, I don't know, I think it would be nice to move up here and assail on Ruth before she leaves the room.